I think it is clear to believe in the power of ideas.
Fresh thinking to the Manhattan Institute.
My name is Howard Husick. I'm Vice President for Policy Research at the Manhattan Institute. And on behalf of both the Institute and our co-sponsor this morning, the Business Council of Westchester County, welcome to our event, Replacing the Tappan Zee Bridge, New York State's Ultimate Infrastructure Challenge. Our focus this morning is on a bridge, but as the title of our event implies, it's on the subject of why and how to renew America's vital infrastructure. This is the time when public officials of a wide range of persuasions and regions agree on the importance of doing just that. Indeed, there's a broad consensus that infrastructure projects, whether roads, tunnels, bridges, airports, or a modernized power grid, not only create thousands of construction-related jobs, but in the long term, lay the foundation for economic growth and prosperity. One need look no further back than the history of New York City and its link to the construction of the Erie Canal, for instance, to understand the vital role of infrastructure projects. And yet, we know that seeing through major new projects to completion today is no easy task. Few infrastructure projects in the entire country stand to have a greater impact on their region than the one we'll discuss today, the replacement of the Tappan Zee Bridge. This 56-year-old span now carries 51 million vehicles a year across the Hudson River between Westchester and Rockland counties, indeed linking New York both to the west and to New England. Our speakers this morning will discuss the challenges that realizing the replacement of the Tappan Zee has posed and its importance for the state, the region, and really the nation. The matters of both why and how we should meet the challenge of replacing the Tappan Zee is our focus this morning. We've brought together for this discussion what I hope you'll agree is a roster of quite impressive speakers, including those deeply versed in the financing of public works projects and a leading public official on the front lines of the Tappan Zee. To kick things off, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague Nicole Gelinas, a senior fellow here at the Manhattan Institute, contributing editor to City Journal, and author of the article in that magazine's current issue, "The Tappan Zee is Falling Down." Nicole.
Good morning. Thank you, Howard. Well, we're lucky to have with us today an elected official, a lawyer, a consultant, an engineer, and a builder. So it sounds like it could be the beginning of a good joke. But unfortunately, there is no joke. New York City, New York downstate region, and the entire state need the Tappan Zee Bridge. And for more than a decade now, it's been increasingly clear that we need a new Tappan Zee Bridge. So I'm here to explain the overview of how we got into this situation and how we can get out of it. The bridge's importance to the region is beyond dispute. As Howard mentioned, more than 51 cars, trucks, buses cross the Tappan Zee every year. The only bridge that comes second, thank you, is the George Washington Bridge to the south. The Tappan Zee actually carries more vehicles every year than either the Lincoln or the Holland tunnels across the Hudson River. The bridge is a vital link, of course, over the Hudson between Westchester and Rockland counties. It's also a link that goes further than that. It's a link that connects the rest of the country to New England via New York, and it connects the region, it connects New Jersey commuters to the New York region as well. So we need the bridge. We need a new bridge. Why is that? Even if the bridge had been built well in the first place, today's traffic is far beyond capacity. Is that better? And the problem is the bridge was not built very well in the first place. Today, infrastructure problems in the US and in New York in particular are plagued by a problem of not building anything on time and on budget. Projects are too expensive and they take too long. The problem, unfortunately, when we built the Tappan Zee Bridge back in the early 1950s was that we built it too fast and too cheaply. In fact, maintenance of the bridge, maintenance costs have doubled every decade since the 1980s. Sometime during the next decade, the state expects maintenance cost of trying to keep the existing span in a state of reasonable repair will actually start to exceed the cost of building an entirely new bridge. So, the original sin of the Tappan Zee Bridge was that we built it, as the state put it at the time, thin and light. Why is that? It crosses the river at one of the deepest and longest spots. It's more than 3.5 miles long. The state had to combine several innovative engineering techniques at the time all at once to get the crossing built. Has not stood the test of time like the Brooklyn Bridge, some of the other older spans that we have. Of course, fast is always relative, and I'll read you a quote that shows you that NIMBY and community activists' successful efforts to stop or at least delay projects is certainly not new. And this quote comes from the New York Times. More than 150 indignant residents of Rockland and Westchester counties boarded the ferried boat this afternoon and sailed to the middle of the Hudson River at Tappan Zee to protest against the proposed construction of the Nyack-Tarrytown Bridge. Now, that quote wasn't from the late 40s, early 1950s, when the state started to engineer and build the bridge. It was actually from 1936. So back then, activists' efforts to stop the bridge worked. They delayed the bridge by a good decade and a half. But by the time Governor Tom Dewey, back in 1949, 1950, decided he was going to go ahead with it, he did it fast, from selecting the site in 1950 to completing the project in 1955. 5 years for everything from sending the drawings to the Army Corps of Engineers, getting them approved within a few months, doing the engineering work. Construction peaked in 1953. Bridge was done by 1955. So looks like a happy ending, right? Well, that's actually not the case. The bridge certainly worked in one respect, the way infrastructure is supposed to work. Population of Rockland County, before that very rural county, doubled during the 20 years after the bridge was completed. Big employers located jobs in Rockland, Volkswagen, Xerox. They knew they had a wider commuter base than just the county. New York and Westchester as well benefited from having a growing bedroom community in Rockland County. The problem is that the bridge simply has not stood the test of time, and that's why we're here today. So, the good news is that we've known that we need to build a new bridge for more than a decade. In fact, the governor went on the radio and said, "I probably shouldn't say this, but we are looking at the possibility of completely replacing the Tappan Zee Bridge. It's one of the options under consideration by the Thruway because it's so old." The bad news is that was 3 governors ago, former Governor Pataki, and it was 12 years ago, back in the summer of 1999. In fact, since then, over the past 12 years, the state has spent, or it has committed to spending within the next year, about $83 million. All it's built for that money is a more than 2,000-page stack of paper. So there are several challenges from getting here to actually completing a new bridge. And unfortunately, at the point we are now, even if everything goes well from today through completion, we're still at least a decade away from breaking the ribbon on a new span. First, what should we build? Should the state do what it did originally and build just a straight traffic bridge for cars and trucks? Or should we build a bridge and a commuter rail line to open Rockland up to a one-seat ride to Grand Central Station? Should we compromise and build a bridge that is heavy enough to carry rail when we can afford to build rail? So those are questions that are still not answered. Then, of course, there's the cost. The bridge would cost $9.3 billion to $16 billion, depending on which of those options that we pick. Now, the original cost of building the bridge was $600 million in today's dollars. Why so much more expensive, even on the cheap end? Well, there's some good reasons for that and some not so good. First, it's always going to cost more to rebuild a bridge than to build a new bridge. There's the challenge of keeping the existing span open while you build a bridge next to it. Very difficult, raises costs exponentially, as we saw in the Big Dig project in Boston. And there's things like noise mitigation, can't have workers going through the night because it is not a rural community anymore. It's a developed community. So you have these cost challenges that add to the price tag. The problem is that any elected official, of course, is wary of saying it's going to cost $9 billion, $16 billion, and then seeing huge cost overruns and schedule overruns. So it's not just the costs, it's the worry that the dollar figure and the time will go over and over and over schedule. So how do we address some of those issues? Third, there's the environmental laws, rules, and regulations. The days are gone when the state could send a few drawings to the Army Corps of Engineers, get approval for a project in just a few months' time. Over the past 41 years, federal and state governments have developed a body of law where the state has to put together a very comprehensive environmental impact statement, not just a few pages worth of statement, but hundreds of pages involving public hearings and so forth. It's not just the rules that add time. The problem is elected officials have a tendency to hide behind these rules. If they don't want to do something, you'll see them blame the environmental process. And you can look at some projects that have been started and are near completion to see the contrast. Atlantic Yards in Brooklyn, for example, same environmental impact, yet the project is well under construction and nearly complete, the stadium part at least. And that's because city and state wanted to do it. About the lawsuits and the environmental complaints, they just said, bring them on, we'll deal with them. They have not said that with the Tappan Zee Bridge, partly because of the cost and the other issues. So what are the answers to these challenges? Well, I will leave these answers up to the panel today. I will say one thing, though, before I conclude. The answer is certainly not to continue to ignore this what really is a disaster in slow motion. There are two scenarios if the state delays or ignores the need to replace the bridge. The better scenario is that the state simply goes on as it has for the past few decades, throwing good money after bad in trying heroically to maintain a crossing that is obsolete and that is a drag on economic growth with traffic congestion, high accident rates, and so forth. The other worst scenario is that one day state officials would find a serious deficiency with the bridge and shut the bridge down. They would not give weeks, months, even days warning before shutting the bridge down. They would have to do so literally within moments, take the traffic off the bridge and close it. That's exactly what the state did 2 years ago with an 80-year-old bridge that crossed Lake Champlain in upstate New York. That bridge, the Lake Champlain Bridge, it too had 20 years worth of ongoing expensive repairs, including a deck replacement, another project that's going on right now at the Tappan Zee Bridge. But the cracked upstate bridge turned out to be unsalvageable. The state closed it and blew it up. They're building a replacement that will take 2 years, and it's a much simpler project than building a new Tappan Zee. Up there, of course, it's a great inconvenience. Downstate, it would be an economic crisis. The nearest bridge to the north of the Tappan Zee is 29 miles up. It does not have the connecting roads and so forth to handle extra traffic diverted from the Tappan Zee. And of course, the crossings to the south are well beyond their own capacities. So on that cheery note, I'll turn this back over to Howard Hesock, my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I'll now invite Marcia Gordon, President of the Business Council of Westchester County, to introduce County Executive Rob Astorino, our keynote speaker. Marcia.
Good morning, everyone, and my thanks to the Manhattan Institute and E.J. McMahon particularly for inviting us and pulling this important conference together. This morning, I have the honor of introducing the County Executive of Westchester, Rob Astorino, and EJ did ask me to be brief, and I will do that. It doesn't surprise me that Rob is here this morning to address this issue, which is complicated, frustrating, challenging, and that's the positive side. But this morning, I'm introducing our county executive who has tackled incredibly tough issues in a fearless way with great skill, tenacious belief in service, and even good humor. At the Business Council of Westchester, we're proud to call him our friend because he believes that business is the economic driver with a strong supporter in a strong government. And we're seeing concrete results in our economy in Westchester, with companies choosing to come to Westchester and, most important, stay and grow in our county. I know that Rob believes we need infrastructure to be the foundation for future growth. Howard, you had those same words, so it must be true. And so there's no better person to launch the discussion this morning about the Tappan Zee Bridge. Ladies and gentlemen, a true leader in Westchester County, our county executive, Rob Astorino.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Gordon, for that very nice introduction. The Business Council of Westchester is a very important cog in the wheel as we try to get things back in gear in Westchester, and I appreciate them for all their support. EJ McMahon, I always say when EJ calls, I pick up the phone. So EJ, thank you very much for the invitation, and the Manhattan Institute for everything that you do. And Nicole, thank you very much. I read that article that you wrote, which was tremendous. Great history on the Tappan Zee Bridge and all the problems that we face. So it is always nice to be in Manhattan, surrounded by fellow bridge and tunnel people. And I bring two perspectives to this discussion. First is as a former metro traffic and shadow traffic reporter. I did. I used to fly 2,000 feet above the tri-state area doing traffic reports on the radio. So I am very familiar with the Tappan Zee Bridge. And let's just see for a minute if you remember this. Okay. All right, let's go. Let's see. Right now on the Tappan Zee Bridge, we've got a 2-mile backup heading into the tolls. Heading on 287 eastbound, we also have a problem with a 2-car accident right around exit 80 in White Plains. So that's about what I used to do. It was always the same story at the Tappan Zee Bridge. I don't even know why we needed to do traffic anymore. The second perspective, obviously, is from my view as county executive. County executives are called to do a lot of things. We're also called a lot of things. None of them are not always very nice. But the thing that is central to our job is that we are elected to get things done. So what better topic to tackle this morning than that testament to government inaction called the Tappan Zee Bridge? You go on Wikipedia, look up "not shovel ready," and all of a sudden a picture of the Tappan Zee pops up. But Nicole begins her excellent article, "The Tappan Zee is Falling Down," making the point that the Tappan Zee Bridge has really become the poster child for government's inability to move forward on infrastructure projects that are vital to the economic well-being of our state and our nation. It was back in October of last year when President Obama, a year into his stimulus program, had an epiphany and coined his now famous "there is no such thing as a shovel-ready project" phrase. And sadly, the president, who, to paraphrase John Kerry, didn't believe this until he believed it, he's probably right. Political, financial, environmental, and legal challenges seem to throw up insurmountable hurdles to every project. Somebody has always got a problem with something, and no initiative is too small to second guess. In my second month in office, I set out to forge a cross-Hudson River free trade agreement. To be precise, Westchester gave 4 horses to Rockland and Dutchess counties for free after I decided to disband the mounted police unit for cost-cutting measures. 5 months later, after the horses had assumed new homes, new duties, and new names, our County Board of Legislators was still holding hearings on the matter and debating legislation, which by this time required the involvement of our planning department because an environmental review had to be ordered up. I swear to you, this is true. Now, we got lucky with the legislation, and here's what it said. The proposed settlement is a Type 2 action under SECRA, and it's implementing regulations 6 NYC-RR, Part 617. Therefore, no further environmental review is required for these projects. So the horses live free now in Dutchess and Rockland County. Can you imagine what would have happened if this was a Type 1? The broader point is this. If this is what it takes to get 4 horses, formerly known as Rocco, Zeus, Hudson, and Chirnanog, across the river, you have to wonder what it will take to replace a bridge that transports 51 million cars, trucks, and buses a year. So with that in mind, here's my alphanumeric blueprint for what it will take to get the Tappan Zee Bridge shovel ready, R-E-A-D-Y. R is for reality. The first rule is that we have to have a plan that is practical enough to actually get the bridge built. The time has come to shape the vision for a new bridge into something that we have the resources and the will to build. Put it another way, we can't wait forever for a perfect solution. Commuter rail trains over the Tappan Zee would be great to have. But how realistic is it to add $6 billion to a $9 billion project when we don't have the first $9 billion? Now, should commuter train rails be part of the future of the bridge? Certainly. Designs for a bridge should not preclude it, but realistically, it is an option for down the road. The immediate future is what needs our attention right now. Bus rapid transit could offer a more realistic solution, so it's time to focus on what can actually get done in the foreseeable future. And yes, we need to think for tomorrow, but we need to build today, and that requires anchoring our visions with realistic expectations. E is for education. Once we come up with a realistic plan, we need to educate the public about it. The good news is that our education campaign will begin with a high degree of certainty. The bad news is that certainty stems from this. It is with absolute certitude, wait a minute, I don't want to use certitude. It is an absolute certainty that large portions of the public will hate whatever is proposed. You can hear the howls now. Oh, it's too big, it's too small, it's too expensive, it's too slow, it's too dangerous for the environment, on and on and on and on and on. Replacing the Tappan Zee Bridge is going to be the government equivalent of root canal. The same can also be said for building new guideways for express buses, that's the BRT, across Westchester and Rockland. We need to accept these facts and be prepared to deal with them. The job of the education campaign will be to show a doubting public that temporary pain will in fact produce long-term gain. That's no small task, believe me. It will require taking a very complex and complicated issue and boiling it down to everyday language that is understandable for the average person who basically wants to know 3 things. How much is it going to cost me? What am I going to get out of it? And why isn't it better to just do nothing and leave the bridge as it is? So the critical importance of the education of the PR campaign to the successful replacement of the Tappan Zee Bridge and delivery of a comprehensive express bus system cannot be overstated. One can argue that you can't start the PR campaign until you know what you're selling. But on the other hand, if this bridge is as critical to the economic well-being of our region as we know it is, the vacuum of indifference that currently surrounds the project needs to be addressed quickly, candidly, and forcefully. Otherwise, opponents will define the issues and most likely just doom any success. So frankly, there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done, and it's not too soon to start. A is for action. It's time for the planners and the engineers, with all due respect, to put the pencils down. This is by no means a criticism of them, but it is a criticism of the process. In the absence of leadership driving toward a unified vision, the planners and engineers have been asked to plan for every eventuality in the hope that eventually some of their work may be used. This is an inefficient and costly way to do business, as well as, documented by Nicole. To spend $83 million on thousands of pages of studies with no end in sight is government malpractice. 10 years, and we don't even have a draft environmental impact statement for public review. That's disgraceful. And when it comes out, we need to keep in mind that the purpose of SECRA is to protect the environment, but not stop all development and become full employment for lawyers. It is time to finish the planning for the bridge that we are actually going to build and then move on to construction. Now, if we don't, the story is going to end badly. There are only 3 outcomes to our current behavior. More money wasted on studies that just sit on shelves, collect dust, and are never opened, higher costs with delaying action, and severe economic dislocation if the bridge has to be shut down for any alternative before an alternative is built, for any reason. We don't live in an era where when the bridge was built, where the operating principle was basically build it first and ask questions later. We can argue whether that's good or bad. Net, it's probably a good thing. But our political will has become so self-interested, so self-absorbed, that we have seemingly lost our ability to attach ourselves to broad common goods and goals. There'll be plenty of hate, believe me, plenty of hate, and plenty to hate in any realistic plan to replace the Tappan Zee Bridge. But the time has come to invest real political capital in getting this bridge built. Government exists to provide essential services that we as ordinary citizens can't provide for ourselves. Roads, bridges, transit are on the top of any list of essential services. So what does it say about government if we can't build a bridge that everyone agrees is essential? It says government is failing to meet its obligations to its people. The Tappan Zee Bridge crosses from Westchester to Rockland, or Rockland to Westchester, between Tarrytown and Nyack. But it is much more than a local bridge. It is a regional, state, and definitely a national economic lifeline. The problem is that if the bridge belongs to everyone, and it does, who is accountable for getting it built? The practical and political reality is that rebuilding the Tappan Zee Bridge must be a priority of the governor. County executives on both sides of the span, our Washington delegation and local officials, all must play a part. But the leadership must come from the governor, in this case, Governor Cuomo, because he, more than anyone else, controls the levers and resources of government to get the job done. So my pledge to Governor Cuomo is that I am ready to stand with him. It is the same pledge I made to him with respect to cutting spending in the state and holding the line on taxes. It's time to act, and he has my enthusiastic support and cooperation. And I am willing to invest whatever political capital I can bring to getting a new bridge built. But we must make rebuilding a priority. Otherwise, the future will be filled with nothing more than studies. D's for dollars. My sense is that the money to pay for the bridge, which, though substantial by any calculation, is actually a secondary hurdle when compared to mustering the political will to build a bridge. If we can develop a clear and cogent business case that the money will be spent wisely and accounted for precisely, and that the end product will produce tangible benefits for our residents, then I believe financing will fall into place. The key is to demonstrate with credibility that this project will add value to people's lives. And that includes making sure that the bus rapid transit system is grounded in reality and will make a difference, not just buses sitting in traffic, but buses that are moving and moving people. Listen to what people are telling their elected officials. They're not saying no to government, but they are saying we're getting tired of being ripped off, paying for things that cost more than they should, and that don't satisfy the needs that they should. So if we can design and deliver a building process that is open, transparent, easy to follow, and delivers tangible results in the end, the money will materialize. Money seeks out opportunity. And if we can credibly spell out the opportunity, money will find it. And that could, and probably should, include private investment. The urge to turn the bridge into some grand social experiment should be completely resisted. Innovation should be encouraged, but not losing sight on fundamental principles, whether it be in design, engineering, or financing. It's equally important. But maybe I'm a little old-fashioned, but I think the public will best be served by keeping things simple. Sometimes a bridge is just a bridge, and this is one of those cases. Sticking to the basics and staying realistic hold the best prospect for serving the greatest public good. And why? Why is for yes. We need to say yes to the bridge. Once we commit to a future course, we have to stay on it. So here's the recap. Keep the plan real. Educate people about the plan. Act now. Show value behind those dollars. And stay committed to saying yes to the bridge. So that's the view from the Tappan Zee, from the former shadow traffic reporter and Westchester County executive. Thank you very, very much for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Mr. County Executive. And now, for further discussion, to introduce our expert panel, I'd like to turn to the most knowledgeable observer of New York politics, my colleague from the Empire Center for New York State Policy of the Manhattan Institute, E.J. McMahon, a native of Westchester County.
Thank you very much. If the panel could join us here on the podium and take your places, and I'll introduce everyone in a moment. Come on up, everybody. Give us just a moment. We'll form the panel here, and then I'll introduce the panel. And good morning. Thank you, everyone. I'll go over a few ground rules and just acquaint you with the format we're going to follow. We have here 4 very knowledgeable experts on different aspects of this issue. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce all of them at once here, and then in series ask each panelist a question to begin the conversation, and then keep the conversation going from there. And then in the last 20 minutes or so of our allotted time, we will take questions and answers, questions from the audience that can be directed to one or more of the panelists. And so I'll begin by, as I said, by introducing the panel, beginning on my own immediate right. Christopher Waite is Senior Vice President of Hacks Engineers. Prior to joining Hacks about a year ago, he had worked for 36 years at the New York State Thruway Authority, and at the end of that period as Chief Engineer of the Thruway Authority, where he had played a crucial role in overseeing the design and implementation of the authority's multi-billion-dollar capital program, including the Tappan Zee Bridge, which I believe is owned by the Thruway Authority. To Christopher's right, Marianne Crotty, who is the founder of Macro Associates, LLC, which is a firm advising private and public clients on infrastructure projects. She's well known to people in this business in New York State. She previously worked 10 years for the global infrastructure firm Parsons Brinckerhoff, and prior to that was a senior policy advisor to Governor Mario Cuomo, a role in which her portfolio included transportation, all of the state's major transportation capital programs, and all of those financing issues associated with them. To her right, Ross Pepe is president of the Construction Industry Council of Westchester and the Hudson Valley, Inc., and Building Contractors Association of Westchester and Mid-Hudson, Inc. He's been involved in association management for 35 years. He's really known as a go-to person. And here I am violating my own rule. I thought I had my phone turned off. I beg your pardon. He's been known as a go-to guy on construction industry issues in this region for many years. His many roles on official panels and in business-related leadership groups include the Rockland Westchester Tappan Zee Task Force. In fact, I think he serves on 2 different Tappan Zee Bridge task forces. And finally, to his right, Barry Lepatner is founder of the New York City law firm of Lepatner and Associates. He's written extensively about the engineering, business, and legal issues related to the design and construction process, including his most recent book, Too Big to Fail: America's Failing Infrastructure and the Way Forward. And he has many provocative views on the way contracting is done in the public sector that have a great relevance to our Tappan Zee discussion today. So I'll begin, Christopher, with a question for you. We were discussing this during the coffee break before the program. I mentioned to you, Christopher lives near Albany, as I do, comes downstate a lot, as I do, and which means you have to traverse the Tappan Zee Bridge fairly regularly. I asked you if you ever hesitated to do so, and you said no. Although then you added something about, well, maybe in a few years, though. But I think that's a good opening for my first question, which is, as somebody who's more expert than anybody in the room on the physical condition of the bridge and on the necessity of replacing it, I was wondering if you could describe to us what the physical condition of the bridge is now, and from the standpoint from that standpoint, what is the necessity for replacing it?
Thanks, EJ, and thank you to all involved in setting this panel up and for inviting me down. And before I even answer that question, I just want to say, yes, I work today for HACS engineers, but I'm not here representing HACS, nor am I representing the Thruway Authority. Is it closer? Okay. But as EJ mentioned, I'm sure I was invited here for my knowledge of the bridge and what goes into maintaining it. The bridge, if you've seen it, driven over it, you understand it's primarily made of steel and concrete. Two construction materials that deteriorate with age, no matter really what you do. You can't help having steel slowly rust. You can keep it painted, but the paint peels off and you got to do it again. So year after year, the Thruway Authority I think puts yeoman effort into maintaining that bridge. There's a crew of 60-plus men and women that work every single day on the bridge, all week long, 7 days a week, and a budget that a few years ago was around $30 million a year in salaries and materials to take care of the bridge. And that doesn't count money that's spent on contractors, such as the redecking job that the article mentions is exceeded $300 million in the past few years. So a steady diet of maintenance and inspection day after day is what keeps that bridge together. But you can't really stop the ravages of time. And particularly the steel, it weathers quite a bit. So there's a constant repair to the steel. Based on inspections, cracks are found and welded. New steel members are cut out, and old ones are cut out and new ones are spliced in. And that's what keeps the bridge together and keeps it strong. But there's concrete as well holding the bridge up, all the piers. Well, most of the piers. A couple of main piers are steel. But there are 200 spans to that bridge, and most of them are supported by concrete columns, which are exposed to the elements. Water laps up against them all day long. Tide is in, tide is out. The water line is up and down. And it's a marine environment, and the concrete and the steel inside it is deteriorating. The crew keeps up on that stuff, but it's more than they can handle. And from time to time, contractors are called in to do repairs of a larger nature that the Thruway isn't really set up to do. But in my view, it's getting ahead of what the Thruway can handle and even what contractors can handle. Or you go out with a huge contract, bigger than the decking job, to take care of all those supporting piers. And now you're spending money close to what you would spend to build a new bridge. So, I mean, that's the chicken and the egg thing. It's a tough one. But it's safe. It's inspected by law every 2 years, and those inspections usually result in follow-up inspections the following year. So it really gets looked at every year in depth from one end to the other. So no, I don't have a problem with driving across it or taking my family across it, but I just know that it's a headache, and yet there's a lot of pride on behalf of the Thruway and its employees. And I used to hear it referred to as the jewel of the system. I don't think I've heard it called a jewel for a long time, but in the 70s when I came to work there, it was definitely the Thruway's jewel and pride and joy. So I hope that answers your question.
So it's a jewel but a tarnished one.
Tarnished one, right.
Mary Ann Crotty, I think I'd asked the question, County Executive Astorino, his letter D in his word ready was dollars. He suggested the dollars maybe were less of a problem than having a credible plan of action. I wanted to ask you, since the lowest price tag I've heard for the bridge design now being talked about is over $9 billion. And since the state of New York already has an unfunded transportation capital plan, in part, can we afford to build this? How can we afford to build this?
I guess the short answer is I don't know how we can afford to build this, but we have no choice. We have to figure out a way to build it. And I do agree with the county executive that if you get the political commitment, you will figure out a way to get the dollars. But we are from an infrastructure perspective, the state is really looking towards moving forward to what I call the bare cupboard. I mean, in order to keep the dedicated highway fund going for all the state, we've bonded everything we possibly could. The Thruway's in a position now where just to keep the basic capital construction program going up the Thruway has to look at a toll increase, and that doesn't include looking at these dollars for the Tappan Zee. And we have an MTA capital program that's short by $10 billion over the next 3 years. So if we figure out how to do all this just by marshaling more debt, we're going to be 3 years from now in a situation where we have no money, we're starting at zero, and we'll have to figure out a way to rebuild our infrastructure from there. When I look at the numbers, I mean, I think some of this is process. I mean, we've gone through this process, and I believe, and I've worked with Marcia and everybody on the task force, I think we've gone through a process where DOT, the Thruway, and the MTA have been very open to the public. They very much have listened to what's going on, but we've never done it in a cost-constrained way. We're looking at what would be a good thing to do if we could do it. And a good thing to do if we could do it is do a commuter rail ready bridge and get it done. But there is no conceivable way with existing toll structures that you could do that. I mean, I can figure a way financially that you can fund a $3 or $4 billion bridge. You start talking about a $16 billion bridge, you can't expect to look at tolls. And if you look at the Thruway, and I agree, the Thruway did look at the Tappan Zee as the jewel. And for many, many years, the Tappan Zee indeed is what was subsidizing the rest of the system. So we sort of knew we had this house that was going to fall down, but we didn't put our money away to save to replace it. And for good reason, because probably somebody else in the government would have found a way to steal the money and use it for something else. So now we're stuck with this problem, and people throw things out. Let's do private-public partnerships. Let's do infrastructure banks. But the reality is, what we're really talking about is doing more debt for this. And this is a perfect project to do debt for. Unfortunately, we've been issuing debt for pavement striping and track workers and all these other things, so we're kind of left without a big capacity to do this kind of project. I think fundamentally, the most important, we really have to look at these costs. Nicole, I tried to do the same analysis actually that Nicole did on, in today's dollars, what did the old Tappan Zee cost? And I came up sort of close. I came up like $700 million, $600 million. It was $83 million in $1950. And now how did we get to this point in the process where this costs so much? And how can you look at other places around the world that are actually building these projects and building them fast? And time is money. And even though this one was built probably not with enough of a useful life, we built a lot of other things in New York that continue to be fine. I mean, why is the George Washington Bridge fine? In fact, they tell me structurally that George Washington Bridge was built so it could have a third deck. We have other bridges that can, the Queensboro Bridge can carry mass transit if we want it to carry mass transit. So we used to be capable of doing that, but over time, we have added so many things to the process. And I also agree with the county executive on probably it's a net positive. There are probably times when we went out and built interstates and did things go back to Power Broker and Bob Moses, that maybe we should have thought about a little more. But I think now we've taken it to another extreme. We talked about $83 million had been expended. The Thruway, when I was talking to them the other day, they said it's going to be $100 million of studies for this bridge. You know how many other bridges could be replaced with $100 million? If there's, and when I had my first conversation with Nicole, I said, you know, we have to study everything. If somebody's primary job is to study keeping alive a fish, they're going to have to find some extra thing you have to do to keep that fish alive. And we're losing our place economically because we haven't found that kind of middle ground. I was in China looking at infrastructure projects, and I'm not suggesting we build them like they did, but they built maglev in 2 years. And they said, so what, we just move the people to another city? And they did say this, and if a few construction workers die, too bad, because we have a lot of workers. So you don't want to go there. But somewhere between there and that somebody saw a hawk flying over the bridge, and so now we have to do an in-depth study on how the Tappan Zee can't affect hawks. And it's not a, that's not a real issue. But that certainly is what slowed down the Peace Bridge upstate. So we've got to start looking at that, and we have to look at the basics of what are these components of cost. And the components of cost are time and materials. And if we don't find a way to be able to do this faster, time is money. We could have built this 10 years ago for a lot less. And even these numbers we're throwing around, they're $2012. We know it's not going to be built in $2012. We know that you have to inflate these to the midpoint of construction. We know every other major project in this region, if you look at East Side Access, 2nd Avenue Subway, they all have gone over budget basically because they get behind schedule. Because we have put in our laws so many things to slow us down that it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle without all the right pieces. So I think we really do have to look at that cost number. I think we do have to develop the political will. And I think we do have to come up with a funding scheme that over the long term is financeable. That's not just going to be from the tolls. It's impossible to conceive of a toll high enough on that bridge to pay for even the smallest amount. It's going to have to be a combination of federal, state, and toll resources, in my opinion. But once you get the plan and you do get the political will, I think you can come up with the money, but you can't do it at the expense of the rest of the system. So this kind of has to be outside the box. This is a project of national significance and has to be something that we're willing to look at. And the pessimistic side of me is like, there's no talk in Congress of doing anything on reauthorization that's going to increase money to the states. So we're talking about trying to figure out, which other projects are you going to steal this from? And we're in a situation where our interstate system was built because the federal government put 90% cost to complete. Every time they agreed to new costs, they put 90% the states put in. There's nothing like that anymore. And there's nothing like that for the Tappan Zee, which was built before there was an interstate system. So I think the only way this is going to happen is we're going to have to marshal political support at all levels of government, and it can't just be the state government.
Thank you, Mary Ann. That's a good sort of summary. Ross, I've heard allusions today, and Nicole explained some of it in her article also, to different versions of the plan for replacing the bridge. In fact, it's my impression that a good part of the time since Governor Pataki first began talking seriously about a Tappan Zee bridge replacement well over a decade ago, has been consumed in deciding which plan to pursue, if any. I was wondering if you could help us understand what the choices were and where they stand now from your perspective.
Thank you, AJ, and I want to thank you and Marcia both for sponsoring this important session. I think it's going to be necessary for more of these to happen in order to get the message that needs to reach Albany, needs to reach Washington, about the importance and vitalness of this project, not only to the local area that it serves, but statewide and nationally as well. It's a global issue. It's far bigger than just about Rockland and Westchester County. I hate following Mary Ann. She always has so much information. It's difficult to fit something else in. But with respect to the alternatives for this bridge, I was involved in 1997 when the governor, then Pataki, set the advisory task force in place to a statewide task force to deal and look at the Tappan Zee Bridge corridor and come up with solutions for traffic back then. And much of what was reviewed back then is being reviewed again and discussed again today in a similar light. But we got back down to the alternatives that were being proposed back then. It was essentially what was proposed through the process that we've just come through. A do-nothing or a no-build, I shouldn't say do-nothing, but a no-build alternative that Chris more or less laid out in his comments, which was, approximately back then in 1997, $1.3 billion in improvements to the bridge, but no increase in capacity, and basically you wind up with a refurbished Tappan Zee Bridge, and then move on to the alternatives that included a guided busway, as Rob Astorino said earlier, mass transit in the sense of commuter rail, heavy commuter rail, light rail, and other similar proposals that were brought forward. I think what the county executive laid out earlier is something that we all need to look at carefully, and that is we have to build today what we can afford to build today. This bridge is vitally important to the local area. It's the lifeline for Westchester and Rockland County's economy and the entire lower Hudson Valley. But it does much more than that. It also serves as an interstate highway system that brings in product from Canada, from the Middle Atlantic states, into and through Westchester County and the Hudson Valley, into New York City, to New England. And we need to look at it in that aspect as well. So what is built finally needs to take into consideration the important commuter needs, because without that bridge, of course, we wouldn't be able to get the workforce into Westchester County and other areas that it serves. The important commercial needs that deal with the product that moves into and out of the area, and the safety considerations as well. That is an important structure. I think back to 9/11 when every other bridge south of the Tappan Zee or any other Hudson River crossing south of the Tappan Zee was closed for nearly a week. The Tappan Zee was the southernmost access to downstate New York from every place else that it serves. So we need to be concerned about safety as well when we think about the new bridge and what it will serve.
Well, Barry, you've written a lot about the issue of public sector construction, quite compellingly and even controversially. And I'm wondering, based on what you see, what you've seen elsewhere and in New York State, what advice you would give to state and regional officials in approaching this project? What are the do's and don'ts, if you will, of getting this thing done?
Well, I think it's important, EJ, that we do a little look back at recent U.S. history. All of us in this room will probably recall that on August 1, 2007, the I-35W bridge over the Mississippi River in Minnesota collapsed very quickly, and it killed 14, injured another 145 people. 1 year before that bridge collapsed, the recommendations from outside consulting engineers to the Minnesota Department of Transportation said, we have 3 recommendations for this bridge, which was already for 16 years corroded and structurally deficient as a rating. And they said, we have to be very careful with this bridge. It was built during an era of fast build, cheap build, and a design called fracture critical. And fracture critical means if one piece of the bridge fails, the bridge can collapse summarily. And so they recommended 3 fixes. One for $11 million to shore up the pieces that were in jeopardy of falling at any moment. Another solution for $22 million, and another for taking the whole deck down and doing it again for $75 million. The bridge commissioners and the transportation department and the transportation head, who was also the lieutenant governor of the state, rejected all 3, saying they were budget busters, pushed them off many years into the future, and a year later, when they permitted a pothole repair of $3.5 million on the bridge, it went down on a moment's notice. Within 14 months, the federal government put $275 million into a new bridge, state-of-the-art bridge they're very proud of. And the comparison between those remediation costs and the new bridge money that was found instantaneously is something for us to look at right here in New York. We have right now the public authorities telling us that we're spending $150 million a year on maintaining the Tappan Zee Bridge. And as Nicole in her excellent article and others have said, it's a minimum of 10 years. That's probably optimistic before a new Tappan Zee Bridge can take shape. That means at the same level, we're going to spend as taxpayers over $1.5 billion keeping alive a bridge which, according to bridge engineers who I've spoken to, and state records show, is also, in part, fracture critical. There are 7,980 bridges in this nation, 160 per state on average, which are both structurally deficient and fracture critical. It means they're corroded, have fracture cracks, frozen bearings, a whole list of things that make them in poor shape, but also suffer from a design error, a design factor of being fracture critical, which the engineers repeatedly say, if one piece fails, the bridge can collapse. We're living with something that does need tremendous, tremendous amount of attention, as was pointed out here. But it's also something that we ought to look at on an expedited basis. Now, around the country, we have many large infrastructure projects that are being canceled outright, rejecting billions and billions of dollars of federal aid because of concern of unknown construction cost overruns. And politicians say, I can't subject my state to the uncertainty of those budget-busting cost overruns. We can end and not have to face construction cost overruns. They should not be a factor in the decision to build needed infrastructure. Why is that? We can sit down with contractors who desperately need jobs today, desperately. The unemployment rate among the construction industry is well over 2 times the national rate. We can negotiate a fixed price for the basic cost of that bridge, which is essentially manpower and materials. And then there are the uncertainties that can be spoken of about known unknowns. We can encounter rock. We can encounter this condition and that. Well, those known unknowns can be itemized, and with careful, sophisticated discussion with the construction team, with the design team, a fixed price, an upset price for those contingencies can be allocated. So if we had a $10 billion fixed cost for replacing the Tappan Zee Bridge, the bridge that everybody believes is feasible and can be done, then we can sit and negotiate the contingency potential change orders. These are not things that are going to happen, but could happen. And maybe those can be capped out at $2 billion. But that would be the maximum that the public would face from contractors who desire and know how to build properly. Once we have that certainty that the bridge will not exceed under any circumstances $12 billion, we can go around and get funding and get the federal government to pay a portion of what is known as a true fixed price agreement with the construction teams, who will waive their right to make claims because they know they have been fairly given a chance to negotiate, and we will not have the uncertainty of facing downstream what Boston faced on its big dig, what we are seeing down at ground zero, and what we see so vastly on all of the airports around the countries, all of our stadiums and so on. We can take the uncertainty process out of the construction world and make it profitable for contractors to do that work, but also have them willingly assume the risk of completing on time and on budget. If we do these things, we will not have politically expedient decisions to cancel much-needed infrastructure for reasons of potential cost overruns, and I hope the Thruway Authority, the City of New York, State of New York, everyone in this country understands that business reality and makes that happen on this very important project.
Well, Ross, I'd like you to comment on that, and let me preface that by noting I'm based in Albany, and I watch state legislation, and I'm familiar with how the state approaches a lot of infrastructure projects. And one factor that's come to complicate every project the state does, even the smallest, typically if there's a piece of legislation involving giving some small city a grant for a parking garage or a hotel facade renovation, inevitably the legislation is held up while details are negotiated of a project labor agreement or of the precise application of prevailing wage standards or of other details that are meant to ensure that the right unionized firms can dominate the bidding for the job. Or at any rate, that's the way it appears. This is something that's become more and more prevalent in recent years. It has different applications upstate than down, and obviously we're more down than up here. But how would you react to Barry's expression of confidence that this could be done on a fixed price basis in a way that could actually contain the costs? And how do we deal with those other issues that I know you're so familiar with, Ross, because you sit on it, you deal with many of these issues on an everyday basis in your professional role. The complicating politics as well as the economics of unionized versus non-unionized firms, project labor agreements, and those pieces of the puzzle.
First, let me address Barry's comments with respect to fixed cost projects. He's right. He's correct that there are methods that can be used to construct large projects like the Tappan Zee Bridge and keep it at or close to the cost of what is anticipated to pay for the job in the beginning. To do that, though, we need some change in state law as it pertains to the way projects are let to bid in New York State today. Today, the process for bidding that controls the Department of Transportation of New York State or the New York State Thruway Authority is essentially a design, bid, build process. So the owner designs the project or retains a firm to design the project goes out to bid, and the contractor then builds. The process that could be instituted and used in a project like Tappan Zee would be design-build. Unfortunately, unless legislation is approved at the state level, design-build cannot be used by the Department of Transportation or the Thruway Authority. So for the past half dozen years or so, we at the industry have been working with state government and the Department of Transportation and Thruway Authority in an attempt to get design-build established in New York State. There's a couple of sections of law that need to be changed. However, it's been unsuccessful. There are some opponents to the process of design-build that we need to satisfy their concerns before that gets done. There was, in fact, a bill proposed this year, but it didn't go anywhere. We're hopeful that next year that bill will come forward and we can start to look at design-build for state projects. In addition to that, of course, there's also private-public partnerships, which essentially would establish a private concern partnering with the state or state agency to design, build the project, and maintain, manage, and lease the project on a long-term basis to pay back the cost over a period of time, and ultimately, when they pull out their profit from the program, turn the facility back over to the state. There's all kinds of variations of those, but essentially, design-build is a key when you talk about fixed prices for these types of projects. With respect to the project labor agreements, the Tappan Zee Bridge happens to be the granddaddy, so to speak, of project labor agreements in New York State for public projects. The very first public project labor agreement that was ever established was for the Tappan Zee Bridge back in the 1990s when the state began the process of upgrading the bridge. It was a project labor agreement that was negotiated between the Thruway Authority and its council, but back then a council firm that they hired from Syracuse, the building trade councils from both Westchester County and Rockland County and the New York State Building Trade Council, and they negotiated a project labor agreement that incorporated into it many changes from the local standard collective bargaining agreements negotiated by the trades councils and the local associations for their members at that time. It reduced costs, it controlled working environment, it eliminated extra manning on projects, it did a whole host of things that made gave the ability to the contractor ultimately performing the job to have a very clean process of hiring labor for both standard work rules, standard work days, and also night work. And much of this work is performed at night because of the concerns for traffic during the day. So the processes are all there. The PLAs are in place. Can they be tweaked and made a little better? Most certainly. We will work and continue to work. I happened to sit in on those project labor agreement negotiations back then, and they were really fine process of bringing all of the labor concerns to the table to make sure they had standard work rules, standard hours, standard holidays, things of that kind, and that there would be no strikes, no disruption of project throughout. And those projects since 1996, multiple projects on the Tappan Bridge, and that agreement was ultimately extended for all of the work that's been performed on the Cross Westchester Expressway, which is soon winding down on the rebuilding of that highway. All of that work done without a single day of any labor disruption or any cost increase that goes beyond the reasonable and customary cost for a project like that.
I want to talk a little bit more about the public-private partnership issue, but I also, to begin with, Mary Ann, maybe you can give a little bit more explanation of this. Whenever construction and infrastructure needs in New York are discussed, this issue of design-build comes up. Could you begin by first explaining a little bit more why design-build is promoted as something that's better than what's called design-bid-build? And secondly, how prevalent is design-build elsewhere in the country compared to New York? Could you quickly
My
explain
understanding
those two
is
things?
New York is one of only like 8 states that don't permit their DOTs to do design build. And if you go outside this country, everybody's doing design build. And the reason why it has a lot of benefits is the way the process was set up is you hire an engineering firm to come in and design it. You base them on the quality of the firm. They come up with the specifications. They put them out there. The contractor has no choice but to bid under those specifications. Even if he has a great idea of how you could do it faster, better, whatever, under all of the state laws, you're not allowed to talk about it. Once it's out there to bid, you have to bid it the way the engineer put it out there. And because government doesn't like to assume a lot of risks, that designers will just design. You'll do something that perhaps there's a better way to do and be equally safe and everything, but you don't do that. So having the designer and the contractor work together, you can kind of come up with those things. You still have a transparent, competitive process, but it's done all together. And on some project of this magnitude, it's hard to assume that you would do this any other way because you're going to need everybody's great ideas to come to the table to do this. And the reason why construction costs are really high in New York, and I think one of the reasons they're really high is we don't look at that. The government doesn't want to assume any risk. It's like if you can build it better and not take any risk, go ahead and do it. You don't really give away the risk to the contractor. You're really buying it from him. And any other risk that the contractor has, you're going to pay for that. I mean, some of the things that happened in New York recently with not paying contractors on time, saying we still want you to come to the table and we want you to build it, but we're not going to pay money. That all comes back and costs you. You don't get any of that for free. So I think we have to start looking at that. And I think design build has great potential on a project like this. And when we talk about public-private partnerships and bringing private money into the case, remember, we're still just borrowing money. There's nobody that's making a charitable contribution to the Tappan Bridge, just because they think it's a good thing to do. You're really going to have to figure out how to pay them back. So you're going to have a system that says, okay, you're going to have the flexibility to build this. Government has to accept it's okay for private people to make money off this. And the private company has to understand that this is not going to be huge profits. This is going to be something, it's still a government project. So everybody has to come together and accept that for any of this to work. And be it There's those who will argue that private money is always going to be more expensive than debt because we can do tax-free debt and the Thruway can issue debt cheaper than most private firms. But having some, again, around the world, you do a combination of bonding and equity. And a lot of times, even though the equity investor is going to want a bigger return, he's willing to wait a little longer to get that. You can come up with a combination of things that will bring this project, the cost of this project down. And I truly believe to afford this, and I agree with what you say on fixed costs, but we're still out of the norm of what this kind of project should cost. We really do have to look at these fundamental ways that the state does business to bring these construction costs down.
Now, in other words, design build is you're actually asking someone to design as well as build, as opposed to designing it, bidding it.
It's usually a team.
It's a team. It's a team approach.
So usually, like what they're doing on the Goethals Bridge, the Port Authority is doing on the Goethals Bridge.
In Staten Island.
Yes. Between Staten Island and New Jersey. They're doing this as an availability payment, and basically they've shortlisted 3 firms, and there's big design firms and big construction firms come together, and they really talk about how's the best way to do this and how do we come up with a price that we can both agree we can get this done on. Normally engineers don't like to do that. I worked for an engineering firm for a long time, and you want basically your time and materials. You want to keep designing. But when you come together and you both have a stake in it, you tend to, you work a little harder, you stay a little later at night, and you try to get the stuff done on time because that's how you make money.
Well, quick answer now, and Ross, maybe you know the answer.
Let me just
yes.
comment on the difference between design, bid, build, where contractors are bidding on what's shown on those drawings, as opposed to design build in this way. Currently, most public works projects, when you take a set of drawings and you put it out into the construction community, you are inviting, and the law requires the public agencies to accept a low bid. In the construction industry, unlike every other industry in America, the low bid is frequently a bid at or below cost to do the work properly. And that's the nature of the construction industry and the way in which government wants the work to be done. As a result, the only way contractors can make a profit is to identify problems with the drawings or other things that come up to put in claims, and that drives the price up 10, 20, 30% on average. In a design-build construct, you're matching up teams of design teams, architects, engineers, along with contractors who now must assume the risk of building it on time and on budget for a fixed price. And that assumption of risk changes the business parameters for how bids are prepared. And if the contracts do provide complete drawings, they're not incomplete and don't have errors in it, if the bidders are the people who are both designing it and building it, then you have a greater sense of certainty than you would have under other circumstances.
I want to interject with a question, and then I have a question for Chris on that involves both finance, design, and engineering. And this is for Chris, but anybody else who knows the answer, if you don't know it off the top of your head, if somebody knows. What is the current toll on the bridge? How much does it raise, again, on the Tappan Zee Bridge? Is it?
It's $5.
It's $5?
They raised it since I left?
Yeah.
It's $5.50, and which?
$5.50.
All right, so. Okay.
Depends if you have
And my bid $6. And this raises how much net for the Thruway Authority?
They have truck tolls that are.
They have truck
different
tolls that are
too,
higher,
much
so it's.
higher.
Does it? In other words, does the bridge for a time? The Thruway Authority was quote unquote making money off the bridge.
Yeah.
It was actually a cash cow, basically, in its prime. And speaking of its prime, the issue was raised about how we have older bridges, and the public becomes accustomed to the fact of having older bridges that do not need replacement, and even in the cases Mary Ann mentioned of the George Washington Bridge, seem to have the capacity to even take on more capacity. The Brooklyn Bridge is, of course, even older and is intact. So the question is, when you're talking about designing and building a new bridge, and there's been talk about designing a new building a new bridge with a stronger deck, designing it with the capacity of bus rapid transit, but this bridge, as Nicole discusses in her article, was something of a quickie even for its era. And as you mentioned, Chris, it's not. It needs replacement. It requires extremely high maintenance costs and extensive effort to keep it safe and open. Are the plans for the new bridge, or can the plans for the new bridge give us a bridge that will last longer than the 50 years that this bridge has basically lasted before requiring massive, constant repair?
I think that's a certainty that it can last longer. They talk 100 years now. I mean, for a bridge as important as the Tappan Zee, certainly 100 years should be a reasonable minimum lifespan, and maybe longer. I mean, you know, there are older bridges, obviously. Materials are better today than they were when the TZ was built and can last longer. But the design is also critical to how long a bridge can last. And, you know, there's all kinds of competing interests, and politics plays a role. People want signature bridges today. They don't want another Tappan Zee that looks like a reptile, you know, arching its back across the river. They'd like something that looks like sails in the ocean or whatever. You know, and those bridges, they are pretty. Are they easy to maintain? I mean, my background with the Thruway for 36 years was maintaining something that somebody else built. I was just born when the Thruway was an idea. And when I came to work there in the 70s, it was already time to start replacing bridge decks on smaller bridges. And the TZ was starting to show its age. If you're going to build something where the inside of it looks like a piano and you have to take a wire out and put another one in one at a time, or maybe you can't take that wire out because it's non-redundant or fracture critical, you got to be careful. Yes, you can build a bridge that'll last a long, long time. It may not be as pretty as you want, but you know, that's a long bridge, 3.1 miles. I can see why they said, wow, if we leave shoulders off or sidewalks off, we're going to save a lot of money. But then what happens if a car breaks down? Well, we see that every day with the helicopter traffic report, right? So, yeah.
Hey, Jay, one of the things that will be critical to the question of the status, the structural integrity of a new Tappan Zee will be whether or not the state, the Thruway Authority, everyone involved recognizes the need for dedicated funding year after year from the first year that new bridge is built for maintenance. Engineers, and I'm sure Chris is very familiar with this, have a chart that shows if you maintain a bridge every year properly and do the right kind of maintenance, you extend the known life of that bridge for a long time. If you fail to do that maintenance, the cost of repairs and the cost of replacement goes up tremendously after 20 years. So we need to educate our politicians, we need to educate the people who finance these projects all across the nation. It's not about bringing our failing bridges back up to standards. It's about then dedicated the amount of money for regular maintenance so that they don't fall backwards in another 15 or 20 years, and we're going to spend trillions of dollars again to do that.
Well, one of the arguments that's been raised in favor of public-private partnerships has been that if you have a private partner involved in not only in design construction but even in ownership or operation of an infrastructure asset, that owner has a greater incentive to provide maintenance in exactly the way you just described. Is that now? I'd ask the other panelists to comment on this too. What do you think of that argument? Can you construct clearly? It seems clear from what Mary Ann and others have said that a public-private partnership deal that can't simply pay for itself based on the likely level of tolls on the bridge would be a toll many multiples of what the toll is now, what it would take to make the bridge itself a money-making proposition. But if a deal was constructed in order to spread risk and to also spread responsibility, do you think that incentive could be created to remove the disincentive for government, or the incentive the government sometimes has to siphon money, infrastructure money, for other purposes?
Can I answer part of the question? A couple of things that were mentioned. with respect to the Tappan Zee Bridge and the tolls collected for the bridge, we have to look at the entire thruway. And when I sat on the transition committee back in the 80s, it's called the Thruway Transition Committee, and we looked at where the money was coming from and where it was going. And a large part of the money that was collected at the Tappan Zee Bridge at the time wasn't being spent at the Tappan Zee Bridge. It was being spent on the rest of the thruway, and it's a 570-mile system. So it, in a way, was the cash cow, but it was the cash cow for the thruway system, which is integral to New York State's economy and growth and opportunity for, business expansion.
In effect, interjected, Mary Ann, you would know about this, not to, to put too fine a point at it, but in fact, the Tappan Zee paid to buy some highways the Thruway Authority bought from the state in 1990.
And the canal
correct?
system.
Yep, and the canal system.
And the canal system.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And the canal system is a money drain on the roadway as well.
Right.
But
So-
orders of magnitude of $50 million a year, not enough to solve this problem. But still, when the state had the thruway take over the canal, that was the only way to come up with money for the canal system, which you could probably argue is more of a tourism parks thing than a transportation thing anymore. I mean, it's a wonderful resource for New York, but whether thruway tolls should be paying for it, we could debate forever. And also put the responsibility on the thruway of some economic development projects upstate. The Syracuse Inner Harbor, the Buffalo Inner Harbor, they're doing some of the access to Stewart Airport. So the thruway has taken on some other things that aren't part of their core mission.
The other thing that was mentioned with respect to the tolling was, I just wanted to point out that the last time there was a toll increase, well, maybe 2 times ago, there was almost 20 years in the period between the toll increases. And the Thruway Authority was totally depleted of funds at the time. And when then Governor Pataki, perhaps, I think, I'm not sure, it might have been Governor Cuomo, permitted the Thruway Authority, because there have been occasions in which the Thruway Authority has tried to get toll increases and the reins were pulled in from the second floor. But when they were permitted to go out, they were given the opportunity to get a 25% increase in tolls, which was minimal at the time. It was cents, it was not dollars. And it waited a long time again after that before toll increases went forward. So I don't know if under a private-public partnership, the entity that is controlling the funds and maintaining the structure would have any better success in getting the money out of the tolling system, because it becomes a very political event. Legislators from everywhere get involved when you talk about toll increases, it seems, especially on the thruway. Lastly, I just want to point out, I know the hockey season is over, but I just want to cross-check Barry on one point that he raised, and that's whether or not contractors bid jobs for no profit. I mean, I've yet to find a contractor who bids a job to lose money. And I also find that, in my experience with contractors that I've represented for 35 years, change orders are the enemy of the contractor. They don't want change orders. They don't want to drive up costs. They want to get into a project, they want to build it, and they want to get out and move on to the next project. So this whole concept that jobs are underbid to increase value later on, I just think I had to comment on in that respect.
Well, we'll let Barry ice the puck perhaps in a few moments.
Well, I did the first national study on the construction industry in a book the University of Chicago Press published in 2007 called Broken Buildings, Busted Budgets. And through a huge array of hundreds and hundreds of studies and analyses from the construction industry itself, clearly showed that the construction industry regularly is forced almost to bid at or below cost. But the problem with construction industry is that often they're not given complete and coordinated sets of drawings so that they can put a fair price on the work that they're bidding for. They're not given sufficient information, and as a result are required to put in change orders and claims to protect themselves to complete the job properly, because the owner, the government, sometimes it's the private entities, have not fully and carefully developed the drawings or made the right decisions that can enable a proper set of design documents to go out to bid. So we have everybody in the process complicit in it. But let me get back to the question I think EJ asked about public-private partnerships. Around the world, P3s, as they're called, are very, very commonly used for large infrastructure projects, whether they're airports, roads, tunnels, bridges, all around the world. In the U.S., we've had singular lack of widespread success, and a large part is because of political discomfort with how P3s are structured. We need to come up with a new financial model that balances the private sector's need to get a return on investment if they're going to invest billions of dollars in a new facility, whether it's a road, a bridge, a tunnel, or the power grid. We need to make sure that over the lifespan of a long-term concession, sometimes these things are 75 or 99 years, that the public's right not to have unfair raising of tolls that are going to fund such a project is taken for granted, and we, the public, lose control of that project. And most importantly, we've got to have a mechanism at the end of the concession that the P3 turns back an asset to the government that has tremendous value, hasn't deteriorated, hasn't depreciated, but they've been required to put the maintenance dollars in so the public gets back a valuable asset that they can either take under public control or put out to other bids for P3s again to start the process. We do not have that financial model in place in the United States, and we need to focus on that, and governments have to get comfortable making the concessions so that private interests can learn how to make the concessions to balance those different priorities.
Well, Marianne, is it even legal in New York State to do what we're, aside from design build, to even get into this, to explore a different public-private
You'd
partnership
have to have
model?
a legislative authorization. I mean, right now, the Thruway is responsible for the bridge. If you want to have somebody else responsible for it, you would have to come up with a new piece of legislation, which is being discussed in Albany. Bills are being discussed on doing public-private partnerships and the way to do them. I mean, I think what you said is absolutely right. It's all how the contract is written. If you have enough protections in there that the toll can't go up more than so much every year, or what it is compared to the George Washington Bridge or the Newburgh Beacon Bridge, and then what kind of maintenance you have to have, because otherwise the last 5 years, if you're just a private guy trying to make money, you'll say, run the thing into the ground. We still need the bridge. So unless the thing is monitored and the contract's written carefully, it's very, very difficult to make sure the private sector is going to keep the bridge up. You'll be in the same situation you are now in 75 years.
Well, I think, by the way, both the outer bridge crossing between Staten Island and New Jersey and the proposed new bids for the Kosciuszko Bridge, which both of them are billion-dollar projects, are being done in some aspects as public-private partnerships in New York City. Now, I don't know whether that's a separate legislative thing, separate from the state, but those are projects.
The Port Authority has the ability to do it. I mean, the Port Authority, even some of the successful ones, Terminal 1 at JFK, the International Arrivals Building, those were done as very successful public-private partnerships. So the Port Authority's doing the Goethals Bridge outside their bonding structure with an availability payment, but that's not the same authorization that the Thruway or Department of Transportation have right now.
Well, I think what I'd like to do now is to begin opening it up to questions from the audience. And what I'd ask you to do is just, if you can raise your hand. We have a microphone because we're taping this, and I'd like you to please identify we have two microphones, pardon me. Identify yourself clearly and also with your affiliation if you can. And then state your question, and if you'd like, identify which panelist or panelists you'd like to address the question. So let's see a show of hands, and I'll try to, the gentleman on the outside of the aisle there, and with the red tie was the first person I saw. So,
hi, Don. My name is Jeff Zupan. I'm with Regional Plan Association. The question is for Chris. I've been involved in this project since Governor Pataki made his radio message, and it seems to me during the course of this project, many things have been built onto it over and above a bridge with 4 lanes and the shoulders. including the walkway, including climbing lanes on the thruway in Rockland County, one of which I believe is needed, the other one I'm not so sure about. And also, as we all know, the two transit options. And those two transit options, up to this point, have both been retained, the bus option and the commuter rail option. It would seem to me that as we think about funding this, and given what Mary Ann said about that only a fraction of the cost of the bridge is going to be covered by tolls, if we're lucky, that we ought to be looking for ways of cutting costs, whether they be through value engineering, which is kind of a vague term, I understand, or some of these other things I've mentioned. And I'm wondering if Chris might want to comment on how we might be able to reduce the costs so that we can get things done.
Well, Jeff, thanks for addressing your question to me. But, no, as you know, Jeff knows I was involved with this project from 2002 to 2004. And you also probably would recall that this is a 30-mile corridor from Suffern down to Port Chester. And the reason for the corridor is NEPA and SECR as well do require that when you look at a project, that you have some logical termini to the project. Edge of river to edge of river wouldn't really be logical because the bridge and its impact extends far beyond that. I mean, and we looked at a limit to the project that was reasonable. Obviously, even that corridor could be extended. I'm sure it has effects upstate to Albany and beyond. But so once you establish that 30-mile corridor, you looked in the corridor to see what needed to be done and what was related to the bridge. And you mentioned some things, climbing lanes and overhead bridges that carry local roads over the thruway in Rockland and Westchester. And, you know, it goes on and on. One thing leads to another. You introduce rail. Where is it going to go? Down the middle, on the side, this side, that side. Trains can't climb hills as well as cars can, so you need trenches, tunnels, whatever, bridges, viaducts. You're right. There's a lot. It's a massive project. When you talk about a bridge replacement for whatever, $4 billion, $9 billion, I don't even know what the right number is. That's really not the whole project. So it behooves everyone to look at cutting costs and to only doing what's necessary, because we can't still be debating this with the bridge closed. It's essential that something happen and that Tappan Z be replaced and put priorities in order, really. It's what it comes down to. So.
Well, Chris, as an engineer, I'd like to follow up on that. If you could put aside the politics for a minute. You're familiar with being hemmed in by political and bureaucratic constraints by somebody who had to work for a major state authority for years, but
I was a good soldier.
You were. I'm sure you were. I'm sure you were a good soldier. But the point is, if you were made the czar of the Tappan Z Bridge, how would you go about doing what you think needs to be done? What is coming from where we're coming from and where we are right now? How would you approach this? What steps would you take now? What design parameter in general would you favor?
Oh boy, that's a good one. Well, let me say this. You know, there's a lot of mention, and I sympathize and agree with environmentalists to a great extent. The bigger you build something, it fills up. You build it bigger, that fills up. So there's got to be a reasonable limit to the size of a replacement bridge. And I think what they're talking about, it functions today as an 8-lane bridge. 4 in the morning, going into the city, 4 in the afternoon going out with that movable barrier. So if you were to maintain 8, get rid of the movable barrier, but maintain 8 lanes for general purpose traffic and add a couple for transit, I think you're now talking about something of a reasonable size. Now, you got to tie it into the existing highway. Obviously, we looked at the very beginning of the study as, could you build this bridge someplace else? You really got to keep it connected to the interstate. You can't go moving that major artery through towns and villages. So you're stuck there at that part of the wide part of the river. But I think what I would do would be look to build ultimately a 10-lane bridge with capacity in the future for heavy rail. I'd go slightly beyond, I think, what they're talking about today, and I would make sure that that rail could carry freight. I really think it's a shame that boats that are unloaded in New Jersey have to go to Selkirk, New York, just south of Albany, to turn around and come back down to Brooklyn. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me when the CSX track is so close to the bridge. So I would go the extra couple of inches or dollars to bring that up to freight standards. And that would pretty much be my simple solution to a new bridge. I'm not going to get into what it's going to look like. It has to be above the water, and it has to make it all the way to each shore.
Now, those are two basic parameters I think that everybody will keep in mind at this point. Second question, Henry, and then the speaker, the man in the middle right there.
I'm a supporter of public-private partnerships.
Could you identify yourself just for the rest of the audience?
Henry Stern, retired city employee, now president of New York Civic. I like public-private partnerships, and certainly the Central Park Conservancy has been a very successful one because they've given us $300 million.
Do you have a question for one
yes.
of them?
When you have a public-private partnership over a long term, isn't it dangerous to the city? Because if the arrangement is good for the private partner, he will hold you to it, to a 100-year lease, for example, in Bronx Terminal Market and Buntsman. If the long-term agreement is bad for the private partner, he will simply fold his company and the city will be left with nothing.
Or the state in this case.
Yes.
Anybody want to take that on? That question about if you have a partner, if you get yourself into a long-term marriage with a partner who ends up being a bad partner.
Well, then you just have to find out, you have to be able to have something in your contract that you can get rid of the partner. I mean, I think you saw that with Stewart Airport. And he wanted out. And they ended up selling the asset back to the Port Authority.
So you need a prenup, in other words.
You need a prenup,
okay.
Right? That's a good term.
Question from the middle. The gentleman in the middle of the aisle there who had a question. Hold on a moment so you can get the mic, okay?
Richard McDougall. I'm with Breslin Development Corp. We're interested in developing retail projects in the areas under discussion. And just following on Mr. Waite's comment, where he said it has to be above the water. Given the advances in tunneling technology in a few years, and the fact that a tunnel is being considered under the Long Island Sound, is this something that has been looked into at all and is considered viable economically?
The tunnel has been looked into. I'm not willing to state that it couldn't be looked at some more. But when you're talking about the number of lanes, for instance, that I threw out, that's not a tunnel, that's multiple tunnels or tubes. The other problem is for transit purposes and even for vehicles, getting down under the river and getting back up again has to be somewhat gradual. So you don't emerge at the shore. You emerge 3.5 miles away from the river on either side. So basically Terrytown and Nyack are not part of the picture anymore. And the county exec did say it's not a local bridge. Well, it definitely wouldn't be, in the case of tunnels. So I'm not totally putting tunnels out. As a matter of fact, to me, the tunnels make a lot of sense for rail because they do move down gradually and back up. But like I said, I think tunnels, the team, and I haven't been on the team in 6 years or 7 years, they've put, I think, tunnels out of the picture.
You mean the design team?
The design team.
DOT and the Thruway Authority. Ross, to follow up on that, this project, because this was alluded to earlier, the biggest infrastructure project in Westchester up until before this one in recent memory has been the widening, reconstruction, updating of Interstate 287, which is the major east-west corridor that the Tappan Zee Bridge feeds into, which becomes the New England, ultimately links up with the New England Thruway. And that has gone, sure enough, taken years beyond its original projected time and has gone far beyond its budget. It's just about done now, and it's taken about a decade. This is what, an order of magnitude larger than that. Given the way that project has gone, what confidence can we have that this project can go better or even be done within 10 years? Since that took 10 years.
Well, that was done in multiple phases. This would be a single phase project, so that's one certainly important factor. Permitting for the project instead of multiple permitting processes, it's a single permitting process. Difficult, but it's a doable process. With respect to the cost overruns on I-287, much of that had to do with what Barry spoke of just before with respect to what the contractors had to bid on, the designs, the plans, what information was provided to them at the time the bids were submitted. Some of the projects actually came in at or near the bid price. Others were cost overruns. But when you look at the whole, if you look at it in its entirety, the Cross Westchester, the entire cost overruns for the project ran about 12%, which is just about the national average. One particular project has run over more, and that was a concern, an issue dealing with rock and concerns about rock, where it could have probably been some better pre-job investigation and analysis done of the rock, so they would have had a better idea of what to expect. But once they got into it, I mean, there was one major crossing of a pipeline that had to be moved by Tennessee Gas. Just alone, that one change, which was not performed by the contractor, it was performed by the gas line company, was $7 million and delayed the project by 10 months. So, I mean, there are those kinds of issues you run into. As one project alone, Cross Westchester actually is about where it should be in the budget phase of the project, and Tappan Zee would certainly, with good pre-bid information, be bid in a way that would be cost effective.
Next question, the man in the back row right there. And please identify yourself for those who don't know.
I'm Robert Weinberg, President of Robert Martin Company, a Westchester County developer and builder, and also a member of the Westchester County Task Force reporting to the county executive with respect to the TZ Bridge. I find the panel very interesting today, but the financing and the discussion has been, starting with Rob pointing at the governor, essentially leaving out the federal role. I look at the TZ Bridge as being there, we think, a Westchester-Rockland property, but it's part of the interstate and it serves the Midwest to New England. There's been no mention of the federal role here, both in the environmental process, which required the segregation and allowed the segregation of the bridge so that we could go ahead with that without dealing with the problems of the roadways at both ends and all the way across to Portchester. And I wonder, first of all, can you talk about the federal role in the design? Secondly, do you think if the bridge is to be 100 years, and they're presently talking about BRT because rapid transit rail will only go down the Hudson River and not serve Westchester County because of the convenience of Metro-North, which nobody discussed here today. You only talked about the Thruway Authority. They have decided not to go to White Plains where there's a transit center because they don't have the rail coming up from New York to serve White Plains. Can you think about even 50 years without solving this problem, let alone 100 years? Third, if you go with BRT and you put it to bus transit standards and don't design the BRT route to be suitable for rail in 25 or 50 or 75 or 100 years, have you doomed Westchester County's crossings to never having it? I can't understand the thought process at the Thruway Authority, which is totally not focused on it, and that would be a set of questions I think could keep you busy.
Well, let's start. Well, Barry, you have a ready answer, and I wanted to ask Mary Ann to comment on the federal issue also.
One of the things that my analysis and study nationwide on major infrastructure and transportation projects is that we have moved past a point where it's legitimate, where it's constructive to think of projects as local projects. A project of this nature, which as we said, has terminuses on Tappan Zee, 30 miles distant on either side, is a regional project. A project like the Tappan Zee Bridge affects as much the states of New Jersey and Connecticut as it does Westchester County and New York City. We have been kind of struggling with a silo mentality when it comes to our national transportation issues. We need to see this project as a regional project, and it does have to involve the federal government. The federal government has to see that they have to be part and parcel of a funding mechanism, because we're going to need that funding. The federal government has to be involved because we're going to bring increased traffic and increased commercial interests to a wide area that can cover 3 states, and that involves seeing how this traffic is going to play out, because congestion alone in our cities today costs our nation hundreds of billions of dollars. The studies from the Texas Transportation Institute, the studies from all of the automobile industries, we are spending a total, the average commuter spends a total of 1 week sitting in traffic doing nothing. 1 week a year doing nothing. Congestion costs our economy over $87 billion a year. So a project that we're talking about here is not limited to the dollars and cents for designing it and constructing it. We're talking about the commercial impact that's going to spread hundreds of miles in a circle all around it. And there are enough studies to show that what I just said is correct. And if we don't factor those things in, 20 years after this project is built, we're going to be saying, what were we thinking?
Well, I guess in the case of many people who use a Tappan Zee, they feel they spend 1 week a month doing nothing. But Mary Ann, the federal budgetary policy is in flux, obviously, across a wide range of fronts. But where are the feds on projects like this these days? And what is the potential?
I think, and I believe I did raise initially that there had to be some sort of federal role in this project, because the numbers are just too big to think of it as only a project that can be funded with tolls. The problem is the reality of federal reauthorization. New York, we can go argue this is a project of national significance. It carries a lot of traffic. It connects New England to the world, all of this stuff. But the reality is there's only so much money that New York is going to ever get from reauthorization. We get 6%. So if we want to take all of our money and put it in this project, then that means there's a whole bunch of other projects in the rest of the state that don't get done. I'd be the first one. There have been other big projects, and people do come together on something. When the bridge in Minneapolis fell down, people come together and make sort of exceptions. But still, you have to remember, our highway program, just over the next 3 years, depending on which numbers you use, is $9 to $14 billion short. The federal reauthorization bill that's being discussed now in the Senate and in Congress is really not going to be any increased money at all for the states. And the MTA plan, the current plan, is $10 billion short. So the Tappan Zee is like a whole other capital program. So there's no way that we're going to get all of that money from the federal government. But I do believe there has to be a federal role, and you can probably come up with and parse off what the realistic amount is that's, interstate traffic, et cetera. But I don't think we can, let's not hold our breath that we're going to get all of this money from the federal government. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, which I didn't earlier, is if you talk to DOT, when you're designing things to federal standards and you're using all the federal oversight, it's even more expensive to build. Now, they're doing this project in a way that it can take federal funding. They're doing the environmental process that way. But unless we step back and get some exceptions to the current regulatory environment, it will be even more expensive to build it if we have to do everything along with the federal process.
Can you expand on that and what Mary Ann was just
saying? Mary Ann's points are excellent, especially about federal standards and the additional cost. In the early 50s, and it was actually late 40s probably, when New York State decided they needed a thruway to go up the Hudson and west across to Buffalo and Pennsylvania. That was all well before President Eisenhower conceived the interstate system. New York was way ahead of its time in financing and building the thruway with private funds through bonds. So eventually, when the interstate system grew and matured, they kind of co-opted the thruway as part of the interstate, both 90 and 87. And in the early part of my career, the thruway got federal aid to do maintenance on the thruway. Started off at around $25 million, I think, in the 70s and grew to $33 million or so. But with DOT having their own financial problems, that money has gone to the Department of Transportation, and the thruway's been operated and maintained strictly on toll money for quite a while. And I think the feds, their laws set them up to deal with 50 states and Puerto Rico. That's it. They don't want to deal with counties, towns, authorities, or anybody else. They only deal with the state DOT. So to them, they don't really understand or know what the thruway is. And I think it's a little difficult sometimes to work with the people from Federal Highway. And on top of that, you got Federal Transit involved in this project too. So you got a lot of legislation, a lot of things that you have to meet, standards and things like that, and it becomes complicated. But sometimes they stand back and they say, look, our role is to make sure you meet all the NEPA requirements. You can have a dumb project if you'd like, as long as you follow the process. And we'll guarantee, and we'll sign off at the end that you followed the process. So, but they're not really, I don't think they have ownership at this point for this project.
So to sum up the answer, go ahead.
Just want to add something on this. In response directly to Bob's question, Bob Weinberg's question, and also to what Rob Astorino said when he was here earlier, is that we need to first get Governor Cuomo on board for this, because he represents obviously our state, and he is the chief spokesperson for our state in regard to a project of national significance within New York State. But then he needs to go to Senator Schumer, he needs to go to Senator Gillibrand, they need to gather our congressional delegation together, and they have to make it a priority of the state and all of the various components of a political force of our state to make it happen. So we do need Governor Cuomo first, and he needs to get out there and say this is a priority.
Good, very good point. Next question is lady in the back right there. Yes.
I'm Marjorie Andrews for the MTA. I have two questions about financing. One is maybe radical, maybe naive, but why not have differential tolls for out-of-state plates to put this on the national agenda? That's the number one question. The number two question is, why not federalize the thruway? Why not abolish the Thruway Authority and put the responsibility for maintenance on the federal government as part of the interstate highway system?
Second question first, Marianne. I think that even may have come up fleetingly when you were with Governor Mario Cuomo, but if I recall correctly.
Well, I mean, at one point, the federal government passed a statute that Senator Moynihan sponsored that actually got New York paid back for the cost of doing the thruway and had the ability to take off the tolls. But looking at the overall state fiscal situation, decided not to do that, to keep the tolls on and to continue to fund the roadway. And we took the money, as you said, and used it on the rest of our highway system. But it's a little deceiving that we got the money back, because it was sort of a backroom trade that we got the money back because they were going to cut back our overall highway funding because they wanted to get closer and closer to whatever your gas tax from your state put in. That was the money that you were going to get back. So we really didn't get a lot of extra money, and we really needed that money for the rest of the system. I mean, it's sort of like you're pressing on all edges here.
So have we already, in effect, as the federal government already in effect, or can it say already in effect, we already bought the highway back from you?
That. Also, they don't pay for maintenance.
Right.
They pay for capital and reconstruction, but once we built the interstate, we, with state money, maintain them.
Right.
So it's either state money coming from our dedicated highway fund, which has gotten to the point where there's no money for preventive maintenance in that, or it's money coming from the tolls in order to achieve, and I do believe the state does achieve this, a higher level of service on the thruway than on the rest of our roads in terms of snow plowing and mowing and all those kinds of things.
And would anybody like to take on the particular toll question or the general issue of tolls and elasticity of toll pricing and where the toll might go in this case? I'll go down to the end, Barry, and start with you.
Well, the whole issue of tolling, when you start to say, should we charge out-of-state residents more and less, is analogous to New York City saying, is there a commuter tax or not? You start to worry about reciprocity, because what happens with Connecticut and New Jersey people? What happens when they look at should New Yorkers be charging, it gets into a thicket of a lot of problems that probably doesn't get you too far and gets little traction with politicians who don't want to deal with that level of complexity. I think that's the basic problem with that.
Ross, have there been considerations in the region of where, does anybody dare think out loud about where the toll might head as part of this? Since discussions of highway tolling, to kind of add to this, are kind of like the subway fares in New York City. They rise very sporadically, and there's tremendous political backlash whenever anyone talks about raising them.
There is, and as I mentioned earlier, 18 years in the making for one toll increase to another, and whenever it's discussed, everybody you can imagine, both on the political and government side, come out of the woodwork and have an opinion on it. Very few in favor. Because when you look crossing the bridge from Rockland County, by the way, I first crossed that bridge in 1956 as a 9-year-old. My father put us in a Chevy Bel Air, loaded the car up with suitcases, moved us up to Rockland County. It became our new home. And then I became a daily commuter from 1965 on. Wow. So I may have some kind of a record there for commuting on the bridge anyway. But it is an issue that we need to deal with on a level that's higher than local when it comes to tolling of the facility. It is, when you talk cents, it just, cents per mile, it just is insignificant really when you think of the service that we're getting. But when it comes to value pricing or congestion pricing or any of those discussions, it all always seems to wind up on the back burner and never go anywhere.
And presumably you need to reassure people in Westchester that the toll money will actually be used on the bridge and not to widen canals near Rochester.
That's true.
Actually, one of the reasons why the decision was made to keep the tolls on and not take them off with this federal ability to do it was there's a huge number of out-of-state people that use the thruways, like 30%. 30%. So you are collecting money from out-of-state people for this. And one of the things that probably has more potential than us turning into our own country and charging different states different amounts is the idea of peak hour pricing. It's been successful in a lot of places, and you can charge more at the very peak hours to try to actually divert traffic to the off-peak hours, and you can raise money that way. And one of the things they do in Florida, they have express lanes where you pay higher tolls, so you can pay less and go in the slower lane, or you can go in the fast lane, and the toll in the fast lane changes depending on how congested the other lanes are. So it can be huge. It can be $10 or it can be 25 cents. And since everybody has Easy Pass, nobody necessarily knows what they're paying. Nobody can, it works. So there's ideas like that. But the thing I go back to, we're still talking around the margin. There's only so much money we can get out of the traffic of that bridge, and it's constrained by the toll policy of whatever the Port Authority's charging on George Washington, which is $8 now, I believe. And then on the Newburgh Beacon, it's $1. So Tappan Zee's somewhere in between, but even commercially, you can't get too out of whack with everyone else, or you will start pushing diversion.
Well, with that, there's a lot of other issues we could address, but we've quickly come to the end of our time here. I wish we had more, but we very much appreciate all of our panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.
I think it is clear how fortunate we are to believe in the power of ideas.
Supply the common sense and the fresh thinking of the Manhattan Institute.